They were able to bring him back a few times, but the damage was already done.
They couldn't fix his heart. This kid with the biggest heart in the world, you can't fix his heart.
Now imagine 30 people in the middle of the street. This wasn't just a fight, it was a brawl, a riot.
He has his cell phone up. It kicks on and starts recording, and it captures the ultimate moment.
There was a picture posted on social media. There was a comment made.
That comment started a firestorm.
We want to fight, we want to fight, we want to fight.
The end result is this huge desire for payback, to get revenge.
He came with the intent to seek and destroy, and that's what he did.
5 p.m. on March 18th, 2020. 911 dispatchers in Albany, New York, received multiple calls about a street brawl on Madison Avenue.
You just have absolute chaos. It's people running around, you're screaming. It's just a formula for disaster.
911, I have a disturbance at Madison Avenue. Okay, is there a fight going on there? Absolutely, yes. Somebody's gonna get hurt out here.
You can hear a series of 911 calls.
I was on the phone with 911. My mom was on, everyone was on the phone.
When police finally arrive at the scene, there's people all over the place, and a 22-year-old man laying in a pool of blood.
Paramedics reached the young man who was bleeding from an injury to his chest. Several of the young man's family members are among the crowd. They identify him as 22-year-old Maurice Sche.
He's on the ground and he's saying, "Graham, I gotta get up. I gotta get up, Graham." He said, "I can't breathe." And I said, "No, Maurice, you can't get up. You can't get up. You have to lay down."
Maurice Mo Sche was born on January 24, 1998. Maurice's parents weren't able to care for him, so his grandmother, Tracy, stepped up to the plate.
When he was 5, he came to live with me permanently. We were inseparable from that point on. Maurice was an easy kid. He was easy. He wanted to make you happy. And as long as you were okay, he was okay.
Maurice was talented and confident.
Maurice wanted to play basketball because his brothers played basketball. But Maurice wasn't that good at basketball. But he stuck with it and he continued with it until he became really good at basketball.
Maurice graduated high school.
He kept his grades up. He did excellent in school. So proud to see him walk across that stage. After he graduated Albany High School, he went to Mohawk University. And he was just, just excited about going to college and happy to be there.
And Albany graduating is a big deal within itself. Some people aren't fortunate enough to do that. So with him graduating and going off to college, he made everyone very proud with that.
He wanted to be an engineer because he was very good at math and measurement and all of that.
But at school, something else grabbed his interest.
He went to college. Some kind of way he got interested in rap, and he came home from school and he said, "Graham, I'm gonna be a rapper. If that's what you want to do, I support you." And he put everything he had into becoming a rapper.
Maurice teamed up with his friend, Jamir.
Got an opportunity to open up for Little Baby and The Baby, and with us opening up, me and Maurice, it was about 200 to 300 people within the stands getting ready for a packed out show. And that was great.
In 2020, Maurice shifted his focus to helping his grandmother realize a dream of her own.
Maurice knew that I wanted my own restaurant. That's always been my dream. So him and his brothers got together and they presented me with a storefront. And he took me down there and he opened the door and both of them was like, Graham, this is your dream.
Him and his brother put their minds together to get this rental space that was like gutted. They went in and they threw out all the old stuff. They was painting, they was doing floors, they was sheetrocking, and he was doing majority of the work. So like that was happening and then boom.
But before the business is ready to open, a street brawl leaves Maurice bleeding from a stab wound to the chest.
He was still conscious at that time, but he kept saying that it hurt. It hurts.
This young man is still laying in his pool of blood, conscious, saying that it hurts. So paramedics try to stop the blood and rush him to Albany Hospital.
When law enforcement first arrived, the scene was hectic and crowded. Within a matter of minutes, the crowd has disappeared.
So many people involved, maybe up to 50 people that are located there as potential witnesses. Unfortunately, most people took off.
Instead, investigators look for physical evidence.
Police are doing their job, combing the area, looking for evidence, trying to find any little piece that would lead them to a suspect, but all they find is a pool of blood and a hairbrush laying in it.
The blood is photographed and the hairbrush bagged as evidence. Then, detectives spot something that might give them what they need: cameras.
The police department have direct access to cameras at red lights at most intersections. It gives them the ability to see if at that intersection where this fight took place, whether or not there's any camera angles that pick up the fight, parts of the fight, maybe the stabbing.
Investigators request footage from the city.
In order to stab someone, especially in the heart, you have to be at a certain range. You have to be in close proximity. So the question is, who was Maurice fighting?
"22-year-old Maurice Sche is fighting for his life at Albany Medical Center after being stabbed in the chest during a street brawl. His family waits at Maurice's grandmother's house for news of his condition.
It was COVID, all of that rules and stuff. So we call in to see how he doing in the emergency room, calling. And they put me on hold. And she was like, we have to get back to you.
Hours later, homicide detectives show up at the front door.
I was like already frustrated, so like when they came in, they was like lingering a little bit. And I'm like, just speak, like, and it was like, he said he didn't make it.
Doctors tried really hard to keep him alive, and they were able to bring him back a few times. But the wound was deep, there was a hole in his heart, a piece was gone, so the damage was already done. Maurice Sche dies of a single stab wound to his heart.
They couldn't fix his heart. His heart. This kid with the biggest heart in the world, you can't fix his heart.
In spite of the family's grief, detectives must press them for information about the brawl. They say it started when a young woman from the neighborhood, Layla, passed away. Layla suffered from spinal muscular atrophy.
When she passed away, there was a wake. Somebody took a photo of Layla at the wake.
There was a picture posted on social media, and there was a comment made
The comment was posted by Maurice's cousin, 18-year-old Talia Green.
One of the girls said she looked flat. My niece Talia said, flat like who? Flat Stanley?
Flat Stanley was a child's story about a boy that was as flat as a piece of paper.
And then that, everybody got the laughing emoji. And after that, my niece's phone was just ringing, chirping, dinging off the hook.
Everybody took it the wrong way. I mean, I know I should never said it, but yeah. People was texting me all over Messenger, asking me, like, oh, why you say that? Basically, like, coming aggressive to me. Oh, we want to fight, we want to fight, we want to fight.
The tension came to a head earlier that evening.
I was at home watching television, me and Talia. She's always in my bed, so we were laying in my bed watching TV. And her phone was blowing up. There was no way that this was just one person texting that fast and that many at one time. And so I looked over and I said, who is that blowing up your phone like that? And she was like, these stupid girls, Grandma. I was like, well, what's going on with the stupid girls? She said, and now everybody wants to fight me.
She was very loved by a lot of people. So when people saw this Facebook post of Talia, things became heated. Emotions being what they were at the time after the loss of someone that they loved.
There were a car full of girls that came to fight Talia that day. Talia has always been a tough kid.
So Talia went out there, I go with the name. She went out there and she fought. I'm calling the police. They're not answering. They're not sending anybody. Cop rides by, I stop him.
The fight gets broken up. The cops basically talk to them and say, you got to get out of here. The girls say something like they're gonna come back. Shortly after the police leave, people came back, but this time a lot more.
Then that's when Maurice and my other grandson got up and went outside. My protector went out there to protect, as he always does.
He's tried to de-escalate the situation, but it got worse.
And that's when all hell broke loose.
This wasn't just a fight. It was a brawl, a riot, something straight out of a movie.
Tracy is calling 911 and trying to get the cops back, and she keeps calling, and they're telling her someone's coming.
911, what's that? Is your emergency? I'm calling about that. Y'all waiting for somebody to get killed? What's going on there? You can hear what's going on.
And they just don't get there fast enough.
A girl yells out to me, yo, you better get your boy. He leaking. And so when I looked up, I saw blood on Maurice's shirt. And so I ran to him. And I guess that's when he noticed, because he hadn't noticed that he was even stabbed at the time. And I carried him out to the sidewalk, and I laid him down.
In the chaos, Maurice Sche had been stabbed.
I just didn't expect a lot of this. All of this, I didn't expect to be sitting here talking about him in the past tense.
Investigators in Albany, New York, learned that the deadly street brawl that led to the stabbing death of Maurice Sche was the result of a clash on social media.
There was a comment said, And there was back and forth going on. It transpired into them fighting. Ended in Maurice getting stabbed.
The brawl took place outside of Maurice's grandmother's home. While several of his relatives witnessed the chaos, no one witnessed the actual stabbing.
The fight was total chaos. I couldn't remember none of it because I was so emotional up there. I didn't even know who had done it. And I was right there, I didn't know. Nobody knew who killed him. Nobody saw him.
Maurice's godmother, Shantae, recalls seeing one man make verbal threats toward Maurice.
The gentleman kept saying, yo, I'm gonna kill you. I'm gonna kill you. And he had his hand in his pocket. That hand never left his pocket.
The boy had the illest look in his eye. And he kept telling Mo he was gonna kill him. Kill him, kill him, I'm gonna kill you, I'm gonna kill you. He said it so much that Shantae said that the hairs literally stood up on her real head. You understand? Under her wig. She said she believed him.
Was the man gripping a knife inside his pocket? Shantae is unable to ID him. Talia gives investigators the names of several individuals who were present at the fight.
I know of most of them. Like, I had went to school with most of them, passed them in the hallway or whatever.
Hopeful that someone else saw something, investigators start knocking on doors.
All of the witnesses that were there, the neighbors and everything, not one person saw this person with a knife in their hand that actually stabbed the victim.
But that doesn't mean they can't help.
A lot of the neighbors came outside and people started recording with their phones.
You had people filming from their windows, from the buildings.
As technicians work to collect the footage, investigators hone in on the list of names from Talia.
The detectives put together what are called photo arrays. They showed these photo arrays to the family members so that they could try to begin to identify who had come to the house and engaged in this fight with Maurice.
Shantae is certain she spots the man who threatened Maurice.
I didn't see the stabbing, but I know who said he wanted to kill him.
Shantae Coleman identified this person, Darius Coakley, in a photo array saying, this is the person.
Investigators are eager to speak with 21-year-old Darius. But when they go to his home, they learn from witnesses that Darius is gone.
He packed up his things quickly, called his mother, and left the area. He deactivated his social media.
It appears that Darius is laying low. As investigators continue to look for him, they learn the footage from the city's surveillance cameras is ready.
Unfortunately, we, pretty quickly learned that although it caught portions of the fight, where the stabbing happens is right out of view.
Investigators still have the cell phone footage collected from witnesses, which has continued to trickle in as news of Maurice's death spreads through his neighborhood.
Given that they were cell phone videos, they were moving a lot. They were not steady, and they were from a variety of angles. It wasn't clear where the knife was or who was doing the stabbing.
The most difficult part in this case was sorting out who was responsible for stabbing Maurice, because he was fighting with multiple different people and it was only a single stab wound. It was a very quick blow that struck him one time.
We decided to send those videos to the New York State Police Lab so that they could arrange them and use technology to try to make it less complicated or confusing. And that took a lot of time. They have a massive caseload.
While they wait, investigators ask Maurice's family to take a look at the videos, paying close attention to who was near Maurice.
In watching the videos, we could see that where we believe Maurice had been stabbed, there was at least 3 people that could have been the suspect.
One of those men is Darius Coakley. Maurice's family helps identify the other 2.
The 2 individuals that were closest to Maurice at the time of the stabbing, apart from Darius Coakley, was a Ramir Stevenson and a Najalik Giggets. Before Maurice is stabbed, the person that he is physically fighting with and punching is Ramir Stevenson.
If you watch the videos and my cousin come out the gate, he's the first person he come in contact with fighting.
Darius Coakley can see that the victim is fighting with Ramir, and he positions himself right behind a vehicle that they're going to pass through. And at that area where basically 2 cars are parked at a curb is the victim, Maurice Sche, Darius Coakley, Ramir Stevenson, and Najali Giggets, all in a very confined space. And we know that Maurice is stabbed there.
Did Ramir stab Maurice as they fought? Or did Darius or Najalik take advantage of the chaotic moment to plunge a knife into Maurice's heart?
There were 3 main potential suspects. We knew that we had to eliminate 2 individuals that did not do it.
Following the stabbing death of Maurice Sche, investigators in Albany used cell phone video collected from witnesses to narrow the list of suspects down to 3: Darius Coakley, Ramir Stevenson, and Najali Giggets. They find Ramir the next day.
When the police find Ramir Stevenson, he is stopped by law enforcement in, I believe it was North Carolina, a southern state. He is arrested because he has a large quantity of marijuana in the car. And when the police find out that he'd been stopped in North Carolina, they either drove or flew to interview him. He was willing to speak with the police, and he told them, if I remember correctly, that he didn't know who had stabbed the victim, that he wasn't the one that did it, but he was willing to speak to a degree openly about what happened, which was not ultimately very indicative of him being the suspect.
As for the remaining 2 suspects, Darius Coakley remains in the wind. And it looks like Najali Giggets may be as well.
We obtained information that he fled immediately after, and that's also a huge indicator of someone's guilt that we look at as detectives is what are someone's actions after they commit a crime.
Najali Giggets had some warrants on some other charges, and it appeared that he was hiding out.
Months after the murder, investigators get an unexpected surprise when Darius reaches out to them. They learn that Darius has spent the last couple of months at his father's house in Brooklyn.
Darius hired an attorney. That attorney called the police department and said, don't speak to my client. And if there are going to be charges, you are going to, charge my client with any sort of a crime, contact me.
For the next several months, the investigation stalls out. Maurice's family grapples with grief and unanswered questions.
When situations like this, right, everyone wants answers quick, right? We forget that there's a process that goes on with everything. So there was times when everyone is frustrated.
We felt that this was a heat of the moment homicide. This was personal in the moment, and we felt that the risk was worth taking our time.
Over a year after Maurice was killed, investigators finally locate Najali Giggets. Najalik denies stabbing Maurice, and it appears he avoided questioning because of his outstanding warrants. With all three suspects denying involvement, investigators have no choice but to turn back to the evidence. They learned that the state lab has finished compiling the cell phone videos.
We had sent the videos to the lab and we got back what are called compilation videos, simple enough, right? They laid them out the best that they could. But even them, they were tough to discern.
There is a moment in one of the videos that catches their attention.
On that video, after Darius Coakley is getting thrown around by Maurice Sche, you see someone run over and bend down to grab something.
It's funny how timing is, but a truck passes by on video and blocks what she is reaching over and bending over to pick up. But it captures just enough to show that she bends down and picks something up in the middle of the street.
Police can only assume that this can potentially be the murder weapon.
They keep watching. Investigators come upon another clip that appears to zero in on the exact seconds they have been looking for.
As fate may have it, there was a gentleman, he was sitting at a red light, and he witnesses this brawl start, and lucky for us, he put up his cell phone and he hit record.
When we took that video, zoomed in on it, and went frame by frame, you're actually able to see when the knife is displayed by Darius.
And it captures the ultimate moment. Darius pulls out a knife and stabs the victim in the heart. Darius stabbed Maurice. It's the type of thing that once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Investigators know they will need more than a grainy video to convict Darius. Law enforcement identified the young woman in the video as Alexis Brown. Albany police bring her in for questioning.
They show her the video footage. She felt cornered and she decided to cooperate.
She was actually quite forthcoming with information, and I think that she truly wanted to help us.
Alexis goes on to share that she was the driver to a group of people who were part of the fight, and that there was someone in her car with a knife.
That person was Darius Coakley. Alexis describes the brawl as pure chaos. And then all of a sudden, she realized it had turned deadly.
You just see arms, arms, arms. You don't know what struck him, who struck him. He's holding his chest, and then he's just gasping. He just go down to one knee. He's just sitting there.
Alexis says she saw Darius fleeing toward her car. He called back to her.
She hears a male voice as she says it on the stand. She hears a male voice come from her car and say, you know, pick that up or pick up the knife. And she looks down in the middle of the street and sees it. She picks up the knife.
During that interview, she stated that she put it in the cup holder of her vehicle and then didn't see what happened to the knife after that.
While Alexis didn't see the stabbing, her statement allows investigators to connect the dots.
There was only one person who was injured to the point where they were bleeding. That knife had to have been the weapon that stabbed and killed Maurice.
Police in Albany have zeroed in on Darius Coakley as the prime suspect in the stabbing death of Maurice Sche. They learned that 21-year-old Darius is a lifelong resident of Albany.
Darius had a mother who was a single mom, working 2 jobs. He was never in any sort of legal trouble. Darius had no criminal record.
They also learned that Darius met Layla in high school. He formed an intense bond with the young woman in the wheelchair.
Darius and her were incredibly close. He obviously cared, loved this person.
Investigators believe that Darius was grief-stricken over Layla's death. So much so that he joined a group headed to seek revenge in her name at Maurice's grandmother's house. But investigators believe that Darius headed into the fight armed with more than his fists.
That's the thing, Darius included a weapon. And, you know, he's the only one. He's the only one out of all the people that were fighting, 30 plus people. Everybody just used their hands, but he felt the need that to pull out a knife.
Over a year after the murder, Darius is finally arrested on August 6th, 2021.
We felt 100% confident presenting it to a grand jury. Once the grand jury indicted him for murder in the second degree and we had a warrant in hand from the grand jury, we contacted his attorney, who then had him turn himself in to the police department.
When Darius came into the police station, he had just shark eyes looking at us like there was no soul left in his eyes. And I told him that he was under arrest for murder.
Prosecutors prepare for trial. As they do, they realize a potentially catastrophic mistake.
The crime scene and the placement of some of the blood evidence was really crucial in this case. And in the crime scene photos, you could see that where he went to the ground, there was a big spot of blood. The police never swabbed that pool of blood.
A weak point defense attorneys will certainly seize.
That pool of blood was important because he must have been stabbed before he lands on the ground with the pool of blood. And the people he was with right before that must have been the stabber.
In a case like this, all you need is reasonable doubt in order to have the suspect walk.
The defense at trial, they could easily say that, they can't prove that he was stabbed at that point. That could have been someone else's blood. They can't prove to you whose blood that was.
Prosecutors team up with investigators. They pore over the evidence, zeroing in on what could be their saving grace.
A hairbrush gets dropped during the scrum in the street and it lands in blood. That hairbrush was collected. That hairbrush was in the pool of blood. We rushed that hairbrush to the lab. They did DNA testing and it was Maurice's blood, just like we knew it was.
So by process of elimination, we can say Maurice Sche was stabbed here. Who was around him at that time? And we're just systematically going through and dissecting the video evidence and the witness statements we have. And once we determined who was in proximity of Maurice at the time of the stab, we knew it was Darius Coakley, Najali Giggets, and Ramir Stevenson. At the time of the stab, Ramir Stevenson has his hands out, nothing in them. Najali Giggets, you can see him fighting, nothing in his hands. The only person with something in their hand was Darius Coakley, and it was in his left hand.
As Darius's trial date looms near, prosecutors are confident. But so is Darius. Instead of alleging he didn't intend to kill Maurice, Darius pleads not guilty.
Darius Coakley opted to go all or nothing. Here's someone who had no prior criminal record. He hasn't been to state prison. Darius does not want to take that chance. He goes all in.
In November 2022, 2.5 years after Maurice Sche is stabbed during a street brawl, his accused murderer, Darius Coakley, goes on trial. Darius's defense team makes the most of the chaos that surrounded Maurice's murder.
A common defense tactic can be confusion. In a street fight, there was so much going on that the argument really was, you can't tell what's happening.
The defense team took a stand of trying to pin the murder on the other two suspects, Ramir Stevenson and Nazalik Giggets.
Their focus really was simply that it was not him, and focusing on Ramir and Nazalik. They didn't call any witnesses. The defendant didn't testify.
Prosecutors counter. They call Maurice's family members, who give heart-wrenching accounts of the night he died.
Maurice's grandmother testified about Maurice being the protector, the elder boy of the family, and he's trying to protect the family. Telling everybody they need to leave, stop disrespecting my grandmother's house. Darius, the defendant in this case, got into his face.
And during that part of it, Maurice sort of takes his hand and mushes it into Darius and sort of shoves him away.
Shantae, Maurice's godmother, testifies that Darius became enraged.
Darius just gets incredibly mad. He's seething. He is saying that he's gonna kill him. He is saying verbally he's gonna kill him.
Prosecutors show what happened next when they present the jury with video from the brawl.
I was able to really present to them some still shots that were zoomed in, slowed down with, things that were circled, and show it to them over and over again.
It really came together with the state police and the phenomenal video work they did, where now we had a knife in Coakley's hand. We had a knife in Coakley's left hand, and he's using that left hand with that knife to stab Maurice Sche in the chest.
You could see clearly that it was not Nazalik and Ramir. It was Darius Coakley.
As they close, prosecutors are clear that Darius's actions in those seconds were no accident.
He did have the intent to cause the death because where he stabbed him. He stabbed him right in the middle of his chest, which is where we all know what's in the middle of our chest, which is the heart, and that's exactly where he got him. So even though he only stabbed him once, we believe that he had the intent to cause the death of Maurice.
Maurice was defending his family, like I believe any man would do. Darius came to seek and destroy. He came with a knife. He came with the intent to seek and destroy, and that's what he did.
Finally, after closing arguments, the jury announces they have reached a verdict.
Darius Coakley was found guilty of second-degree murder in the case of Maurice Sche.
The judge imposed 25 years to life in state prison. You have a crass comment which prompted this huge desire for payback, get revenge. We're gonna get revenge for what you said to this young woman who just died 3 weeks ago. And then you have Darius Coakley, plunging a knife into the heart of Maurice. The result now is Maurice's life has been taken, and Darius Coakley's life is now in he's in state custody.
We got justice for Maurice, but at the same time, someone else's life is being destroyed.
But it's a lose-lose. Another black man behind bars for 25 years.
Darius doesn't understand the light that he took out of my family's eyes. Maurice died not because he feared what was in front of him, but because he was defending what was behind him.
To honor Maurice, his family opened the store.
Montreal, August 24th, 1992. The city was moving through another warm summer afternoon the kind that makes office windows glow under a pale Canadian sun. Downtown streets pulsed with ordinary life. Cars rolled through intersections. Students prepared for a new academic year. Secretaries organized paperwork. Professors returned from vacations, conferences, and research trips. Everything looked normal. And that was the problem. Because some of the most devastating tragedies in history do not announce themselves with sirens. They arrive quietly. They sit in parking lots. They ride elevators. They walk through familiar hallways. They carry briefcases. At approximately 1:30 p.m., inside Concordia University's Henry F. Hall building, a man stepped out of an elevator and entered the 9th floor. Nobody screamed. Nobody ran. Nobody called the police. Why would they? He belonged there. He was not a stranger. He was not a masked intruder. He was not a shadow lurking outside campus gates. He was a professor. A colleague. A familiar face. For years, faculty members had seen him walk these corridors. They had attended meetings with him, shared research discussions with him, argued with him, avoided him. Some feared him. Most simply hoped to stay out of his way. Yet even among those who knew him best, almost nobody imagined what would happen during the next few minutes. Hidden beneath the appearance of another ordinary workday was a storm that had been building for years. Years of resentment. Years of accusations. Years of humiliation. Years of rage. The kind of rage that grows silently behind office doors. The kind that feeds on every perceived slight. The kind that transforms disagreement into obsession. And obsession into violence. The 9th floor was quiet. The sounds were familiar. Telephones ringing. Papers shuffling. Voices drifting from offices. The soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Nothing about the atmosphere suggested history was about to change. Then came the first gunshot. For a split second, many people didn't even recognize the sound. Universities are not places where people expect gunfire. A sharp crack echoed through the corridor. Some thought something had fallen. Others assumed construction noise. A mechanical failure. A slammed door. Then another shot came. And another. And suddenly the illusion shattered. The hallway transformed from a place of learning into a battlefield. People froze. Some ducked instinctively. Others stood motionless, unable to understand what they were witnessing. A professor with a gun. A colleague firing at colleagues. The unimaginable unfolding in real time. Panic spread faster than comprehension. Doors slammed shut. People crawled beneath desks. Voices rose into screams. Footsteps thundered through hallways. Some desperately searched for exits. Others searched for phones. And a few searched for answers. Why? Why here? Why now? Why him? Those questions would haunt investigators, journalists, survivors, and families for decades. Because this wasn't a random act. It wasn't a stranger attacking a campus. It wasn't a terrorist operation. It wasn't an act committed by someone disconnected from the institution. The violence erupted from within. Like a crack spreading through the foundation of a building long before anyone notices the damage. Long before collapse becomes inevitable. As the shooting continued, terror spread beyond the 9th floor. Word traveled through elevators and stairwells. People began running. Some had no idea where the danger was. Only that danger existed. Students emerging from classrooms found themselves swept into waves of confusion. Faculty members locked doors without knowing exactly what was happening. Administrative staff whispered fragmented rumors. A shooting. A gun. Someone dead. No, several dead. No one knew. Not yet. Outside the building, downtown Montreal remained largely unaware. Pedestrians passed beneath towering structures. Traffic lights changed. Storefronts remained open. Life continued. Inside Concordia University, however, time seemed to fracture. Minutes stretched into eternities. Every second became precious. Every sound became terrifying. Every hallway became a potential trap. Meanwhile, at the center of the chaos, one man continued moving through a landscape he knew intimately. He knew the offices. He knew the names on the doors. He knew the people. And that knowledge made the situation even more horrifying. This was not indiscriminate violence. Targets existed. Histories existed. Grievances existed. Behind every shot lay years of bitterness. Years of conflict invisible to most of the public. The massacre did not begin that afternoon. Not really. The bullets began that afternoon. The massacre itself had started long before. It had started in arguments. In accusations. In complaints. In professional rivalries. In disciplinary disputes. In festering anger left unchecked. Like a fire smoldering beneath floorboards, hidden from view until flames finally burst through the surface. As emergency calls flooded dispatch centers, first responders rushed toward a scene they could barely comprehend. Reports were chaotic. A professor was shooting people. Hostages might be involved. Multiple victims. Unknown casualties. Unknown locations. Unknown motives. The details shifted with every passing minute. Inside the building, fear became physical. Survivors would later remember the sensation vividly. The pounding heartbeat. The dry mouth. The trembling hands. The desperate silence while hiding behind locked doors. The unbearable uncertainty. Waiting. Listening. Praying. Wondering if the next footsteps would stop outside their office. Wondering if the next knock would be their last. For some, those fears became reality. For others, survival would carry its own burden. Because surviving a massacre often means living forever with moments that refuse to fade. A face seen in a hallway. A final conversation. A sound. A scream. A gunshot. A memory frozen in time. Years later, survivors would still remember where they were standing. What they were wearing. What they were thinking seconds before everything changed. That is the nature of trauma. It carves itself into memory with extraordinary precision. And on that August afternoon, trauma carved itself into the history of Concordia University. Before the day ended, four respected academics would lose their lives. Another victim would suffer devastating injuries. Families would receive phone calls that shattered their worlds. Students would discover that places dedicated to knowledge are not immune to violence. And an entire nation would confront uncomfortable questions about warning signs, institutional responsibility, workplace conflict, and the terrifying consequences of unchecked obsession. But standing at the edge of this story, before we understand the victims, before we examine the investigation, before we follow the courtroom battles that would come later, one truth demands our attention. This tragedy did not emerge from darkness overnight. The man at the center of the massacre did not wake up that morning as a mystery. For years, people had seen pieces of the storm gathering. Not the full picture. Not the ending. But fragments. Enough fragments that, in hindsight, seem impossible to ignore. The challenge of this case is not simply understanding how the shooting happened. The challenge is understanding how years of escalating conflict existed within one of Canada's major universities until violence finally erupted. Because when people look back at horrific crimes, they often search for a single moment. A trigger. A spark. One event that explains everything. Real life is rarely that simple. Sometimes tragedy is built slowly. One grievance at a time. One argument at a time. One warning sign at a time. Until eventually, the weight becomes unbearable. And then, on one ordinary afternoon, the entire structure collapses. This is the story of ambition and resentment. Of academia and obsession. Of warnings that echoed through university corridors long before gunfire did. It is the story of 4 lives stolen. Of survivors forever changed. And of a massacre that forced Canada to confront a disturbing question. What happens when a person's anger is allowed to grow for years inside the very institution that should have recognized the danger? To answer that question, we must go back. Back before the gunshots. Back before the headlines. Back before the police tape. Back to the beginning. Back to the man whose name would become permanently linked to one of the deadliest university shootings in Canadian history. Valerie Fabricant. To understand what happened on August 24, 1992, we first need to understand the world in which it happened. Because this story did not begin with gunfire. It began inside offices. Inside conference rooms. Inside university hallways lined with bulletin boards, framed degrees, and doors carrying the names of scholars who had spent their lives chasing knowledge. At first glance, Concordia University seemed like the last place where such a tragedy could occur. Located in the heart of Montreal, it represented many of the ideals people associate with higher education. Diversity, opportunity, intellectual freedom, debate, discovery. Thousands of students walked through its buildings every day carrying textbooks, coffee cups, notebooks, and dreams about the future. Some hoped to become engineers. Some wanted careers in business. Others pursued science, literature, art, or technology. For many young people arriving in Montreal, Concordia was not simply a university. It was a gateway. A place where futures were built one lecture at a time. The city surrounding it reflected that same energy. Montreal in the early 1990s was vibrant and complicated. French and English cultures blended together in a unique rhythm found nowhere else in North America. The streets were alive with conversation. Cafes spilled onto sidewalks. Old stone architecture stood beside modern towers. The city carried the elegance of Europe and the ambition of a growing Canadian metropolis. For students arriving from across Canada and around the world, Montreal felt alive. Every neighborhood seemed to tell a different story. Every corner carried a different language. Every season transformed the city into something new. Summer brought warmth and festivals. Autumn painted the streets in gold and red. Winter covered everything beneath snow and silence. Spring returned life to the parks and terraces. At the center of this constantly changing landscape stood Concordia University. Its downtown campus was woven directly into the city itself. Unlike isolated universities surrounded by fields or suburban neighborhoods, Concordia lived among office towers, restaurants, apartments, and busy streets. Students stepped out of classrooms and immediately into the pulse of Montreal. On most days, the campus felt energetic. Crowded elevators. Busy hallways. Study groups. Faculty meetings. Research discussions. The ordinary sounds of academic life. The Henry F. Hall building was one of the most recognizable parts of that environment. A massive structure rising above the downtown core, it functioned almost like a small city contained within concrete walls. Every day, thousands of people moved through its corridors. Students hurried between classes. Professors carried stacks of papers. Administrative staff answered phones and organized schedules. Visitors navigated unfamiliar hallways. From the outside, the building appeared strong and permanent. From the inside, it felt endlessly busy. Elevators moved constantly. Doors opened and closed. Conversations echoed through corridors. Announcements appeared on bulletin boards. Life flowed through the building in a predictable rhythm. And nowhere was that rhythm more evident than within the university's academic departments. The Department of Mechanical Engineering occupied part of the 9th floor. To outsiders, it probably appeared unremarkable. A collection of offices. Meeting rooms. Research spaces. Faculty workstations. Yet behind those doors existed a world invisible to students. A world shaped by professional competition, academic politics, funding battles, publication disputes, and personal rivalries. Universities are often imagined as peaceful places devoted solely to learning. The reality can be far more complicated. Academia is built upon achievement. Professors compete for grants. Researchers compete for recognition. Departments compete for prestige. Careers can rise or fall based on publications, promotions, and professional reputation. Most of the time, these pressures remain manageable. They become part of academic life. But occasionally, tensions grow. Disagreements become grudges. Professional disputes become personal conflicts. What begins as a debate about research can evolve into something far darker. Within Concordia's engineering department, tension had been growing for years. Many of those conflicts were largely invisible to students. Classes continued. Research continued. Administrative work continued. The machinery of the university kept moving. Yet beneath the surface, relationships were deteriorating. Arguments emerged over authorship. Questions arose regarding research practices. Accusations circulated. Complaints were filed. Meetings became increasingly difficult. Trust began to erode. For some faculty members, these disputes were frustrating but manageable. For others, they became consuming. One of those individuals was Valery Fabricant. Long before the massacre, he had become a controversial figure within the department. He was intelligent, driven, accomplished in many respects. But colleagues increasingly viewed him as confrontational. Stories about arguments followed him. Complaints accumulated. Relationships fractured. His presence often seemed to generate tension wherever he went. Over time, many people learned to anticipate conflict whenever his name appeared on a meeting agenda. Yet even then, most still viewed the situation through a professional lens. Difficult colleague. Troublesome professor. Persistent complainer. Academic troublemaker. The language people used remained rooted in workplace dynamics. Few imagined the possibility of violence. That assumption would later become one of the most haunting aspects of the entire case. Because warning signs often appear clearer after tragedy than they do beforehand. Looking backward is easy. Living forward is not. The people working inside Concordia during those years were not characters in a crime documentary. They were human beings navigating everyday responsibilities. Teaching students. Publishing research. Attending meetings. Managing deadlines. Trying to balance professional obligations with personal lives. Many of them were immigrants. Many had families. Many carried dreams that stretched far beyond university walls. Some were planning vacations. Some were preparing new courses. Some were helping graduate students complete research projects. Their lives extended far beyond office doors. Yet fate would eventually bring them together inside one department at one university during one extraordinary period of escalating conflict. As the years passed, tensions surrounding Fabricant became increasingly difficult to ignore. The disputes were no longer isolated incidents. They became patterns. Colleagues found themselves drawn repeatedly into arguments. Administrators faced growing challenges. Formal complaints appeared. Professional relationships deteriorated further. And still, university life continued. That may seem surprising from a modern perspective. Today, people often expect institutions to identify threats quickly and intervene decisively. Reality is often messier. Universities are large organizations. Information exists in fragments. One person knows part of a story. Another knows a different part. No single individual sees the entire picture. As a result, warning signs can become scattered across years, departments, and conversations. Each individual incident may appear manageable. Together, however, they form something much more troubling. The summer of 1992 arrived quietly. Students left campus for break. Many faculty members traveled. Administrative offices operated at a slower pace. The atmosphere became calmer than during the regular academic year. Hallways that normally bustled with activity grew quieter. Classrooms sat empty. The campus seemed to exhale. Yet beneath that calm surface, unresolved conflicts remained. They did not disappear with the summer. They simply waited. By late August, preparations for the upcoming academic year were beginning once again. Faculty members returned to their offices. Administrative staff resumed regular schedules. Research projects continued. Meetings appeared on calendars. The university was preparing for another semester. No one knew they were also approaching one of the darkest days in Canadian academic history. The morning of August 24th began much like countless mornings before it. The city woke beneath warm summer skies. People commuted to work. Coffee brewed in kitchens. Newspapers landed on doorsteps. Cars filled downtown streets. Inside Concordia, employees arrived carrying briefcases, folders, and plans for the week ahead. Some greeted colleagues in hallways. Some checked voicemail messages. Some reviewed paperwork waiting on desks. Everything felt ordinary. The routines that create a sense of safety remained intact. And perhaps that is what makes this story so unsettling. Nothing about that morning looked extraordinary. There were no alarms. No warnings broadcast across campus. No indication that within a matter of hours, the university would become the scene of unimaginable violence. The people who entered the Henry F. Hall building that day believed they were stepping into another routine workday. They could not know that some of them were walking toward the final chapter of their lives. They could not know that ordinary conversations would become final conversations. That routine meetings would never happen. That unfinished projects would remain unfinished forever. The setting of this story is not merely a university. It is a place built upon trust. Trust that colleagues will act professionally. Trust that disagreements will remain disagreements. Trust that institutions dedicated to knowledge remain safe. On August 24, 1992, that trust would be shattered. And when it shattered, the consequences would reach far beyond a single building, a single department, or even a single university. The shockwaves would spread across Canada, forcing an entire nation to ask whether the signs had been there all along. Before we witness the violence itself, however, we must first understand the people whose lives became intertwined with this tragedy. Because behind every headline are human beings. Not statistics. Not names in newspaper articles. People. People with families. People with ambitions. People with futures they expected to live. And before those futures were stolen, they each had stories of their own. Long before their names appeared in newspaper headlines, before investigators assembled timelines, before courtrooms examined evidence, they were simply people living ordinary lives. That is often the first thing lost in stories about violence. The victims become statistics. A number. A casualty count. A line in a report. But tragedy is never experienced as a number. It is experienced as an empty chair at a dinner table. An unanswered telephone call. A birthday that arrives after someone is gone. A voice that suddenly exists only in memory. When the shooting at Concordia University ended, 4 members of the faculty would lose their lives. Another would survive with injuries and memories that would last forever. Each person carried a history that stretched far beyond a university office. Each had people who loved them. Each had dreams that extended into the future. Each woke up on August 24th believing they would return home. None of them knew that morning would become the final chapter of their story. Michael Gordon Hogben was one of those people. To students and colleagues, he was a respected academic. To those who knew him personally, he was much more than a title on an office door. He was a husband. A friend. A colleague whose life had been shaped by years of education, research, and dedication. Like many professors, his career represented decades of effort. The public often sees only the finished result. The degree on the wall. The published papers. The position within a university. What remains unseen are the years spent studying late into the night. The sacrifices. The uncertainty. The countless moments when success was far from guaranteed. People who dedicate themselves to academia rarely do so because it is easy. They do it because they believe knowledge matters. Because they believe education changes lives. Because they find purpose in discovering something new and sharing it with others. For Michael Hogben, the university was not merely a workplace. It was part of a life devoted to learning. Students entered his classroom carrying questions. They left carrying knowledge. That quiet exchange happens thousands of times every day at universities around the world. Most people never stop to think about it. Yet education is built upon those relationships. Teacher and student. Question and answer. Curiosity and discovery. Michael spent years contributing to that process. On August 24th, he arrived at work expecting another ordinary day. Somewhere in the future there were likely meetings he intended to attend. Projects he planned to complete. Conversations he expected to have. Plans extending weeks, months, and years ahead. Like all of us, he lived inside an assumption that tomorrow would arrive. Then there was Aaron John Saber. Another respected member of the engineering faculty. Another man whose story contained far more than professional achievements. Colleagues remembered intelligence, dedication, and commitment to academic work. Students knew him as an educator. Friends knew him as a human being with interests, opinions, and relationships extending far beyond campus walls. Every life contains private chapters invisible to the public. Family gatherings. Personal struggles. Moments of joy. Moments of disappointment. Dreams achieved and dreams postponed. The tragedy of violence is that it erases future chapters while leaving the earlier ones unfinished. Those left behind become custodians of memory. Preserving stories. Sharing photographs. Repeating favorite anecdotes. Trying to keep a person's presence alive despite their absence. Aaron Saber belonged to a community that extended far beyond the university. His death would not be felt only in offices and classrooms. It would echo through homes. Through friendships. Through lives connected to his own. In the days after the shooting, people would struggle to reconcile two realities. The professional figure they knew. And the devastating fact that he was gone. Then there was Matthew McCartney Douglas. A scholar. A colleague. A man whose life had followed its own unique path toward Concordia University. Every professor represents years of accumulated experience. Different schools. Different cities. Different opportunities. Different challenges. The journey into academia is rarely straightforward. People relocate. Change institutions. Adapt to new environments. Pursue research interests wherever opportunities arise. By the time someone becomes an established faculty member, they carry decades of experiences behind them. Matthew Douglas was no exception. He had built a career through persistence and intellectual effort. The office where he worked was only one small part of his identity. Outside university walls existed a complete human life. Friends who expected future conversations. Family members who expected future holidays. Colleagues who expected future collaborations. Those expectations vanished in a matter of seconds. Violence has a brutal efficiency. Years of life can be destroyed almost instantly. Yet the consequences continue indefinitely. The grief experienced by loved ones does not end when news cameras disappear. It remains. Quietly. Persistently. Sometimes surfacing years later in unexpected moments. A familiar song. A photograph. An anniversary. A memory triggered without warning. The final faculty member who would ultimately lose his life was Foivos Ziogas. His story carried a particularly heartbreaking dimension. Unlike some of the others, death did not come immediately. He suffered catastrophic injuries during the attack. For weeks, hope and fear existed side by side. Family members waited. Doctors worked. Colleagues followed updates. People hoped for recovery. Hope can be powerful. Even in the darkest circumstances, human beings search for reasons to believe things might improve. A small medical improvement. A positive report. A sign that survival remains possible. Those moments matter. They become lifelines for families enduring unimaginable uncertainty. For a time, Foivos Ziogas remained at the center of that uncertainty. The battle was not over. The story was not yet finished. Yet eventually, despite every effort, the injuries proved too severe. His death increased the official toll of the massacre. Another future lost. Another family devastated. Another reminder that violence often continues long after the shooting itself ends. And then there was Elizabeth Horwood. Unlike the others, she survived. But survival is not the same thing as escaping tragedy. She suffered injuries during the attack. Physical wounds eventually heal. Psychological wounds often remain. Survivors carry unique burdens. They remember details others never witnessed. The sounds. The fear. The confusion. The moments when life seemed balanced on a knife's edge. Many survivors spend years revisiting those memories. Wondering why they lived when others died. Questioning decisions made in moments of terror. Searching for meaning where none exists. For Elizabeth Horwood, August 24th became a dividing line. Life before the shooting. Life after the shooting. Two different worlds connected by a single afternoon. As investigators later reconstructed events, they focused on evidence. Timelines. Locations. Ballistics. Witness statements. Those details were necessary. Essential even. But they could never fully capture what had actually been lost. Because what was lost was not merely 4 lives. What was lost were futures. Unwritten books. Future research. Future discoveries. Future conversations. Future celebrations. The invisible possibilities that disappear whenever a life ends unexpectedly. Imagine the ordinary moments that never happened. A professor preparing another lecture. A family gathering years later. A retirement celebration. A grandchild meeting a grandparent. A friendship continuing. A joke shared over coffee. These moments rarely appear in historical records. Yet they are often the greatest losses of all. The victims of Concordia were not famous celebrities. They were not politicians. They were not public figures known across the country. They were educators. Researchers. People who spent their lives contributing to knowledge. And perhaps that is part of what made the tragedy so shocking. Universities symbolize progress. Learning. Reason. Dialogue. The idea that disagreements can be solved through discussion rather than violence. The massacre shattered that assumption. The victims became unwilling participants in a story that contradicted everything universities are meant to represent. In the aftermath, students struggled to understand what had happened. Many had attended classes taught by faculty members affected by the tragedy. Some knew them personally. Others recognized them from hallways and lecture rooms. Suddenly familiar faces were gone. Offices stood empty. Schedules changed. Normal routines disappeared. The loss became visible in countless small ways. An office light that never turned on again. A nameplate remaining on a door. A class reassigned to another instructor. Reminders everywhere. The university community entered a period of collective mourning. Grief spread through classrooms and administrative offices alike. People gathered to remember. To share stories. To make sense of the incomprehensible. Many found themselves returning to the same question. How could this happen here? How could colleagues who spent years working together become part of such a horrifying story? There were no easy answers. Only loss. And memory. As weeks passed, newspaper articles focused increasingly on the investigation and the man responsible. That is often how public attention works. The perpetrator becomes the center of the narrative. The victims gradually move into the background. Yet every true crime story contains a responsibility. To remember who suffered. To remember who paid the price. To remember that behind every criminal act stand real human beings whose lives deserved more chapters than they were given. The story of Concordia University is often remembered because of the shooting. But it should also be remembered because of the people whose lives were stolen. Michael Gordon Hogben. Aaron Jan Saber. Matthew McCartney Douglas. Foivos Ziogas. And survivor Elizabeth Horwood. They were not simply names connected to a tragedy. They were individuals whose lives mattered long before August 24, 1992. People with histories. People with relationships. People with futures. And as the summer afternoon approached the moment that would change everything, none of them could have imagined how quickly ordinary life was about to disappear. The hallways remained quiet. Office doors remained open. Conversations continued. Telephones rang. Paperwork accumulated on desks. Outside, Montreal carried on beneath warm skies. Inside the Henry F. Hall building, another workday appeared to be unfolding exactly as expected. But somewhere within that building, a man was already moving toward a decision that would leave 4 families grieving, a university traumatized, and a nation searching for answers. The lives of the victims were about to collide with a storm years in the making. And when that collision came, nothing at Concordia University would ever be the same again. The clock was moving toward early afternoon. August 24, 1992. Inside Concordia University's Henry F. Hall building, the day still felt ordinary. The summer term had created a quieter atmosphere than usual. Hallways were less crowded than they would be during the peak academic year. Offices remained occupied, phones continued ringing, and faculty members worked through the countless responsibilities that accompany university life. There was paperwork to review, meetings to prepare for, research projects to continue. The future still appeared predictable. No one on the 9th floor knew that normalcy was already slipping away. Somewhere else in the building, Valerie Fabricant was moving with purpose. To anyone who happened to pass him, there was little reason to be alarmed. He was not a stranger. He was not forcing his way into the university. He belonged there. He knew the hallways. He knew the elevators. He knew the offices. Most importantly, he knew the people. That familiarity would become one of the most chilling aspects of the attack. Violence is terrifying when it arrives from outside. It becomes even more disturbing when it emerges from within a trusted environment. At approximately 1:30 p.m., Fabricant arrived on the 9th floor. The corridor stretched ahead of him. Office doors lined the hallway. Names appeared on placards. Behind those doors, professors and staff members continued working through another routine day. Some were reading documents. Some were answering correspondence. Some were discussing projects. Others were preparing for the coming semester. The atmosphere was calm. Nothing suggested catastrophe. Yet for Fabricant, this was not a normal afternoon. Years of resentment had traveled with him into that hallway. Years of arguments. Years of complaints. Years of professional disputes. Years of perceived betrayals. The emotions that had accumulated over time now accompanied every step. The university saw a corridor. He saw something entirely different. He saw conflicts. Grievances. Enemies. People he believed had wronged him. The gap between those two realities would soon become deadly. As he moved through the floor, he initially searched for specific individuals. Some of the people he wanted to confront were not there. Some offices were empty. Some doors remained closed. But the absence of certain targets did not stop what had already been set in motion. The point of no return had already been crossed. Then came the first gunshot. For a brief moment, confusion outweighed fear. Universities are not places where people expect gunfire. The sound seemed out of place. Sharp. Sudden. Unfamiliar. A few people paused, trying to identify what they had heard. Perhaps something had fallen. Perhaps maintenance work was occurring somewhere nearby. Perhaps a door had slammed unexpectedly. Then another shot echoed through the corridor. And another. Within seconds, uncertainty transformed into terror. The reality became impossible to ignore. Someone was shooting. Panic spread immediately. The orderly rhythm of the workday shattered. People emerged from offices, only to retreat again. Others instinctively sought cover. Some froze completely. Fear affects people differently. There is no universal response. Some run. Some hide. Some remain motionless, unable to process what is happening. The human mind often struggles to accept the impossible. And what was unfolding on the 9th floor felt impossible. A professor was firing at fellow faculty members. Colleagues who had spent years sharing the same workplace suddenly found themselves trapped inside a nightmare. The hallway became a place of chaos. Voices rose. Doors slammed. Footsteps echoed. People shouted warnings. Others called for help. Some desperately searched for telephones. The attack unfolded quickly. The victims had little opportunity to understand what was happening before violence reached them. Moments that had begun as ordinary workplace interactions were interrupted by sudden catastrophe. Conversations ended mid-sentence. Documents remained unfinished on desks. Coffee cups sat untouched. The future disappeared in an instant. As gunfire continued, fear expanded beyond those directly witnessing the attack. Word began spreading through the building. Fragments of information traveled from person to person. Someone has a gun. There is a shooting. Stay inside. Lock the door. Nobody knew exactly what was happening. Yet everyone understood enough to be afraid. On other floors, employees and students received only pieces of the story. Those fragments were frightening enough. People hurried into offices. Some barricaded doors. Others crouched beneath desks. Many listened for sounds from the corridor. Every footstep became alarming. Every unexpected noise caused tension to surge. Meanwhile, on the 9th floor, the attack continued unfolding with devastating consequences. Faculty members who had dedicated years of their lives to education suddenly found themselves facing danger in the place where they worked. The environment that had once represented scholarship and intellectual exchange now felt unrecognizable. The transformation happened almost instantly. One moment, it was a university. The next, it was a crime scene in progress. Outside the building, life continued. Cars moved through downtown Montreal. Pedestrians crossed intersections. Office workers carried lunches back to their desks. The city remained largely unaware. There is something haunting about that contrast. Inside the university, lives were being shattered. Outside, the afternoon appeared perfectly normal. The two realities existed simultaneously, separated by walls and distance. As emergency calls reached authorities, dispatchers struggled to piece together the situation. Information arrived rapidly and often inconsistently. Reports described an armed professor, multiple victims, possible hostages, an active and unpredictable threat. Police officers and emergency responders began moving toward the university. Every minute mattered. Yet for those trapped inside, time felt distorted. Moments stretched endlessly. People waiting behind locked doors experienced a unique kind of terror. Not knowing can be worse than knowing. They did not know where the shooter was. They did not know who had been hurt. They did not know whether they would be discovered. They only knew that violence was somewhere nearby. Many later remembered listening intently, trying to identify sounds, trying to determine whether danger was approaching or moving away, trying to stay silent, trying to remain calm. It was almost impossible. Fear filled every second. As the situation evolved, Fabricant eventually entered an office and took hostages. The nature of the crisis shifted once again. What had begun as a shooting now became a hostage situation as well. For those trapped with him, uncertainty reached another level. The danger was no longer distant. It was immediate, personal, unavoidable. Inside that confined space, every movement carried significance. Every word mattered. Nobody knew how the situation would end. Hostage situations often create a strange distortion of time. Minutes can feel like hours. People become hyper-aware of small details. Expressions. Gestures. Changes in tone. The mind searches constantly for clues about what might happen next. Would the standoff end peacefully? Would violence continue? Would help arrive in time? No one could answer those questions. Outside the office, police and university personnel worked frantically to assess the crisis. Inside, fear remained constant. Elsewhere in the building, survivors continued hiding. Some sat silently in darkened rooms. Others whispered to colleagues. Many thought about loved ones, families, spouses, children, the people waiting for them at home. During moments of extreme danger, priorities become remarkably clear. Deadlines disappear. Meetings become meaningless. The things that matter most reveal themselves immediately. Survival, family, life itself. For many individuals inside Concordia that afternoon, those thoughts dominated every moment. As authorities converged on the scene, efforts intensified to end the crisis without additional loss of life. The building remained tense. Uncertainty lingered. No one knew how many victims there were. No one knew how many more could follow. Then, eventually, the momentum shifted. The hostage situation reached a critical turning point. One of the hostages, together with a security employee, found an opportunity. It was an extraordinarily dangerous moment. A moment requiring courage under unimaginable pressure. A moment where hesitation could carry terrible consequences. When the opportunity appeared, they acted. The weapon was wrestled away. Control shifted. The balance of power changed. After so much fear and uncertainty, the threat was finally stopped. Valerie Fabricant was taken into custody. The shooting was over. But the tragedy was only beginning. Because when the chaos finally settled, reality emerged. People began learning who had been lost, who had been injured, who would never return home. Emergency personnel moved through hallways that only hours earlier had been part of a normal workday. Now those same hallways carried evidence of catastrophe. Shock spread through the university community. The full scale of what had happened became increasingly difficult to comprehend. Faculty members searched for information. Students searched for answers. Families awaited news. Many refused to believe what they were hearing. A university shooting. Committed by a professor. Against colleagues. The story sounded unreal. Yet it was real. Painfully real. The afternoon sun still illuminated Montreal's streets. The city still moved. Traffic still flowed. But inside Concordia University, the world had changed forever. The attack had lasted only a relatively short period of time. Its consequences would last decades. Lives had been taken. Families devastated. A university traumatized. A nation shocked. And even as police secured the scene and investigators began arriving, one enormous question already loomed over everything. How had years of conflict finally erupted into this? The answer would require investigators to look backward. To examine warning signs. Relationships. Disputes. Patterns of behavior. The shooting itself was over. The search for understanding had only just begun. As evening approached and the building slowly emptied, silence returned to the 9th floor. But it was not the same silence that had existed before. This silence carried grief, shock, disbelief. The kind of silence that follows catastrophe. And within that silence lay the first clues to a tragedy that would haunt Concordia University for generations. When the gunfire finally stopped, nobody inside Concordia University felt relief immediately. Relief requires certainty. And certainty was still impossible to find. The corridors remained filled with confusion. People emerging from locked offices did so cautiously, as though danger might still be waiting around the next corner. Some opened doors only a few inches. Others remained hidden until police officers personally instructed them to come out. Fear does not disappear the moment a threat ends. It lingers. It clings to the body. It turns every unexpected sound into a potential warning. For many survivors, the first minutes after the shooting were almost as surreal as the attack itself. The silence felt unnatural. The building that had been filled with panic only moments earlier now seemed suspended between two realities. The nightmare had ended. Yet its consequences had not fully revealed themselves. Emergency responders began moving through the 9th floor with urgency. Police officers secured hallways. Paramedics searched for victims. Investigators started preserving evidence before it could be disturbed. Every room mattered. Every doorway mattered. Every object suddenly carried potential significance. The Henry F. Hall building had transformed from a university facility into an active crime scene. The transition was immediate and absolute. A few hours earlier, the floor had been dedicated to education and research. Now it belonged to investigators. Bright office lights illuminated scenes of devastation. Documents remained scattered across desks. Coffee cups sat where they had been left. Open notebooks still displayed unfinished thoughts. Calendars marked future appointments that would never happen. There is something uniquely haunting about crime scenes that occur in workplaces. The surroundings remain ordinary. Nothing about the furniture suggests violence. Nothing about the walls predicts tragedy. The contrast creates a disturbing sense of unreality. Life appears frozen at the exact moment everything changed. As paramedics reached the victims, hope and heartbreak existed side by side. Medical teams focused on saving lives. That was their mission. Not understanding motives. Not reconstructing events. Simply preserving life wherever possible. Some injuries were catastrophic. Others left room for hope. Every second mattered. Every decision carried weight. Outside the building, emergency vehicles had begun attracting attention. People gathered. Reporters arrived. Curious pedestrians slowed to watch. Rumors spread rapidly across downtown Montreal. At first, many reports were vague. Something had happened at Concordia. There was a shooting. People had been injured. Perhaps killed. The details remained unclear. Inside the university, however, the reality was becoming painfully clear. Officers moving through the crime scene quickly recognized the scale of what had occurred. This was not an isolated confrontation. This was not a single victim. This was a massacre. The emotional impact on first responders should never be underestimated. Police officers and paramedics train for emergencies. They learn to remain calm, to focus on procedure, to maintain professionalism under pressure. Yet they are still human beings. When confronted with scenes involving multiple victims, particularly inside environments associated with learning and safety, the emotional weight can be immense. Many responders later carry those memories for years. Some for the rest of their lives. As investigators began documenting the scene, they faced an enormous task. The attack had unfolded across multiple locations. Witnesses had observed different portions of the incident. Some had seen the shooter. Others had only heard gunfire. Some had been trapped nearby. Others had received information secondhand. Piecing together the complete picture would require patience and precision. Every statement needed to be collected. Every observation needed to be compared. Every detail needed to be examined. The first stage of any major investigation is often chaos. Information arrives faster than it can be verified. Witnesses are frightened. Memories remain fragmented. Timelines overlap. Facts and assumptions become tangled together. Investigators must separate what is known from what is merely believed. That process had already begun. On the 9th floor, evidence technicians carefully documented everything they encountered. Photographs captured the positions of objects. Measurements were recorded. Ballistic evidence was collected. Each step served a single purpose: to preserve the truth before time could erase it. Crime scenes tell stories. Not through words. Through physical evidence. A spent cartridge. A damaged wall. A broken object. A trail of movement. These silent details often reveal more than any witness can. Unlike memory, evidence does not become confused. Unlike people, evidence does not forget. The challenge lies in interpreting what it means. Meanwhile, Another process was unfolding beyond the university walls. Families were beginning to receive devastating news. For investigators, identifying victims is a procedural necessity. For families, it is a life-changing moment. Some received phone calls. Others were contacted in person. The exact words spoken during those conversations varied. The emotional result did not. Shock. Disbelief. Grief. The collapse of an ordinary day into something unimaginable. Many families initially struggle to accept such news. The mind resists it. There must be a mistake. A misunderstanding. Wrong information. The person cannot be gone. They were alive this morning. They left for work. They said goodbye. They had plans. Human beings are not emotionally prepared for sudden loss. Especially loss arriving without warning. Across Montreal and beyond, families connected to the victims found their lives divided into two chapters. Before August 24th. After August 24th. That division would never disappear. Back at Concordia, investigators continued examining every aspect of the attack. One fact emerged almost immediately. The suspect was not an unknown outsider. He was a member of the faculty. That revelation intensified public shock. Strangers commit acts of violence. Criminals commit acts of violence. But a professor, a colleague, someone trusted to educate students. The contradiction disturbed people deeply. Universities depend upon trust. Trust between students and instructors. Trust between colleagues. Trust in the institution itself. The attack had shattered that trust. As news organizations learned additional details, public attention expanded rapidly. Journalists searched for answers. Who was Valerie Fabricant? Why had he done this? Had there been warning signs? Could the tragedy have been prevented? These questions emerged almost immediately. Yet investigators understood something important. The answers would not be found in the first few hours. Major cases unfold gradually. The truth often hides beneath layers of complexity. At first glance, the motive appeared straightforward. A disgruntled professor had attacked colleagues. But experienced investigators know that simple explanations are often incomplete. People rarely commit extreme acts for a single reason. There are histories, patterns, accumulated grievances, personal narratives that develop over years. Understanding those narratives would become essential. The crime scene itself offered early clues. Witnesses consistently described long-standing conflicts, professional disputes, tensions involving faculty relationships, arguments that had persisted long before the shooting. Investigators took notice. Whenever multiple witnesses independently describe the same pattern, it deserves attention. A picture was beginning to emerge. Not a complete picture. Not yet. But enough to suggest that the roots of the tragedy extended far into the past. As evening approached, the university remained largely closed. Hallways once filled with activity stood nearly empty. Police tape marked restricted areas. Investigators continued working under bright lights. Outside, journalists reported developments to an increasingly stunned public. The emotional atmosphere surrounding Concordia changed dramatically within a single day. Hours earlier, the university had been preparing for another academic year. Now it was preparing for funerals. Students who had expected lectures instead encountered grief counselors. Faculty members who had expected meetings instead attended emergency discussions. Administrators faced questions they never imagined needing to answer. The institution itself had become part of Canadian history. Not because of academic achievement. Because of violence. As darkness settled over Montreal, many people found sleep impossible. Survivors replayed events repeatedly. Families struggled to process devastating news. Investigators reviewed witness statements. Journalists prepared stories for morning editions. Throughout the city, conversations centered on the same shocking subject. How could this happen? How could a respected university become the scene of one of the deadliest workplace and academic shootings in Canadian history? Those questions would dominate the days ahead. Yet another question slowly began taking shape beneath them. Perhaps the most important question of all. Was this truly unforeseeable? Or had warning signs existed long before the first shot was fired? The crime scene had revealed what happened. The investigation now needed to uncover why. To find that answer, detectives would need to move beyond the 9th floor. Beyond the physical evidence. Beyond the gun itself. They would need to examine years of conflict, complaints, accusations, and professional hostility. Somewhere within that history lay the path that led to August 24th. And as investigators began retracing that path, they would discover that the story was far more complicated than a single afternoon of violence. The massacre may have lasted minutes. Its origins stretched back years. And hidden within those years were warning signs that, in hindsight, seemed impossible to ignore. The search for those warning signs was only beginning. In the days following the massacre, investigators faced a situation that was both unusually simple and unusually complex. Simple because the identity of the shooter was never in doubt. There was no mystery surrounding who had carried out the attack. No unknown suspect. No lengthy search. No nationwide manhunt. Valerie Fabricant had been captured at the scene. Witnesses had seen him. Victims had known him. The physical evidence pointed directly to him. In that sense, the investigation was straightforward. But understanding why the massacre occurred proved far more complicated. The shooting itself had lasted only minutes. The story behind it stretched across years. To uncover that story, investigators needed to move beyond the crime scene. Beyond the weapons. Beyond the forensic reports. They needed to enter the complicated world of academic politics, professional rivalries, personal grievances, and human psychology. Almost immediately, detectives began interviewing people who had worked alongside Fabricant. The interviews revealed a pattern. At first, individual accounts seemed like ordinary workplace complaints. Difficult personality. Frequent arguments. Professional conflicts. Every large organization contains people who are hard to work with. Universities are no exception. But as more witnesses came forward, investigators noticed something troubling. The stories were remarkably consistent. Different individuals described similar experiences. The same themes appeared repeatedly. Hostility. Accusations. Threats. Confrontation. Resentment. Each witness possessed only a small piece of the puzzle. Together, however, those pieces formed a disturbing picture. The image that emerged was not of a man who suddenly snapped without warning. Instead, investigators found themselves examining years of escalating conflict. To understand those conflicts, they first examined Fabricant himself. On paper, his career contained many signs of success. He was highly educated. Intelligent. Accomplished within his field. His journey into academia had required considerable determination and ability. People do not become engineering professors by accident. The path demands years of study, research, and professional achievement. By many traditional measures, Fabricant had succeeded. Yet professional accomplishments tell only part of a person's story. The interviews painted a more complicated portrait. Many colleagues described interactions that often became confrontational. Disagreements rarely remained simple disagreements. Criticism frequently evolved into accusations. Professional disputes became intensely personal. Some individuals reported feeling intimidated. Others described behavior they considered threatening. As investigators collected testimony, a pattern of conflict became increasingly difficult to ignore. One recurring theme involved professional recognition. Within academia, recognition carries enormous significance. Research publications. Authorship credits. Career advancement. Promotion opportunities. These issues may seem abstract to outsiders. Inside universities, they can shape entire careers. Investigators learned that Fabricant believed he had been treated unfairly by colleagues and administrators. He frequently voiced concerns regarding academic credit, research contributions, and professional advancement. In his mind, he was not the source of the problem. He viewed himself as the victim. This distinction would become critical. Many people experience disappointment without resorting to violence. What separated Fabricant from most individuals was the intensity with which he interpreted those disappointments. To him, setbacks often appeared deliberate. Disagreements appeared malicious. Professional obstacles appeared personal. As detectives examined correspondence, complaints, and records accumulated over the years, they discovered evidence of long-standing disputes. Some involved research. Others involved administrative decisions. Many revolved around trust. Or more accurately, a lack of trust. Relationships within the department had deteriorated steadily. What may have begun as ordinary workplace tensions gradually transformed into entrenched hostility. One of the most important realizations during the investigation involved the role of perception. Human beings do not respond solely to reality. They respond to their interpretation of reality. Two people can experience the same event and reach entirely different conclusions. One sees misunderstanding. The other sees betrayal. One sees criticism. The other sees humiliation. The distinction can be profound. Investigators increasingly believed that Fabricant's worldview had become dominated by perceived persecution. He appeared convinced that powerful forces within the university were working against him. Whether those beliefs reflected reality was less important than the fact that he genuinely seemed to believe them. Psychologically, that difference matters enormously. Because people act according to what they believe is true, not necessarily according to what actually is. As interviews continued, another troubling question emerged. Had warning signs been overlooked? The question was uncomfortable. No institution likes examining its own failures. Yet investigators could not ignore it. Numerous individuals reported previous incidents involving conflict. Some recalled aggressive behavior. Others remembered verbal threats. Several described situations that had caused concern long before the shooting. The challenge was determining what those warning signs actually meant. Hindsight creates clarity. After a tragedy, every warning appears obvious. Before a tragedy, reality feels much less certain. Universities regularly manage disputes among faculty members. Most never become violent. Administrators must constantly distinguish between ordinary conflict and genuine danger. That distinction is not always easy. Nevertheless, the investigation revealed growing concerns that had existed within portions of the university community. Those concerns now appeared in a new and far more alarming light. Meanwhile, detectives worked to reconstruct the timeline leading up to August 24. What had Fabricant been doing in the days before the shooting? Had he planned the attack? Or had events unfolded spontaneously? The evidence strongly suggested preparation. The weapons had not appeared by accident. The ammunition had not appeared by accident. The movement through the building suggested intent. This realization shifted the investigation in an important direction. The massacre increasingly appeared not as an impulsive outburst but as a deliberate act. That distinction carried enormous significance. Premeditation reveals a different psychological landscape than sudden emotional eruption. It suggests decisions made before the moment itself. Planning. Consideration. Commitment. The deeper investigators looked, the more evidence pointed toward long-standing grievances that had gradually evolved into obsession. Obsession is a dangerous force. Unlike ordinary anger, it does not fade naturally. It feeds itself. Every new disappointment becomes proof. Every disagreement becomes confirmation. Every perceived slight strengthens the narrative. Over time, the individual becomes trapped inside a self-reinforcing cycle. Investigators increasingly believed they were examining precisely such a cycle. Yet even as the evidence accumulated, Some questions remained frustratingly difficult to answer. What specific event had finally pushed Fabricant toward violence? Was there a single trigger? A final humiliation? A professional setback? A confrontation? The investigation explored numerous possibilities. Some theories appeared plausible. Others collapsed under scrutiny. This phase of the case became filled with dead ends. Witnesses remembered conversations differently. Rumors circulated widely. Speculation flourished throughout the university community. Many people attempted to identify the exact moment when tragedy became inevitable. Investigators soon discovered that no single moment existed. The roots of the massacre appeared too extensive, too complex, too deeply embedded in years of conflict. There was no magic key explaining everything. No single argument. No single meeting. No single decision. Instead, the evidence suggested accumulation. Layer upon layer of resentment building over time. Like pressure increasing inside a sealed container. The exact moment of rupture mattered less than the years of pressure preceding it. As media coverage intensified, public interest focused increasingly on Fabricant's personality. Journalists searched for explanations, psychological profiles, warning signs, character assessments. People desperately wanted a simple answer, a clear reason, a neat narrative. But human beings rarely fit neat narratives. The investigation repeatedly encountered contradictions. Some individuals described Fabricant as brilliant. Others described him as impossible. Some recalled periods of normal interaction. Others remembered constant conflict. The challenge was reconciling these perspectives. The truth often exists between extremes. People capable of terrible acts are rarely monsters every moment of every day. They are human beings. Complicated. Contradictory. Capable of functioning normally in some situations while becoming destructive in others. Understanding this complexity became essential. Without it, the investigation risked replacing explanation with oversimplification. Another major area of inquiry involved institutional response. How had Concordia managed previous concerns? What actions had been taken? What actions had not? Investigators reviewed records, examined complaints, studied administrative decisions. The answers were not always satisfying. Large institutions often move slowly. Problems become divided among departments. Responsibility becomes fragmented. One office handles one issue. Another office handles another. No single person sees the entire picture. This fragmentation can allow patterns to remain hidden until it is too late. The Concordia case forced many people to confront that possibility. Not because administrators wanted tragedy, but because systems designed for ordinary disputes may prove inadequate when confronting extraordinary risk. As weeks turned into months, the investigation's conclusions became increasingly clear. The massacre had not emerged from nowhere. Its origins stretched across years of deteriorating relationships. The violence of August 24th represented the final expression of a conflict that had long been escalating. That realization brought little comfort. If anything, it made the tragedy more disturbing. Random violence is frightening. Predictable violence can be even more frightening. Because it raises difficult questions. Questions about responsibility. Questions about intervention. Questions about opportunities that may have existed before lives were lost. By now, investigators possessed a far more complete understanding of the path leading to the massacre. Yet one final challenge remained. Understanding the precise chain of events that transformed years of resentment into an act of mass murder. Somewhere within the evidence, witness statements, and historical records lay the final breakthrough. The moment when scattered pieces would align. The moment when the broader picture would finally come into focus. And when that breakthrough arrived, it would fundamentally shape how Canada understood not only the Concordia massacre, but also the dangers posed by long-term workplace hostility left unchecked. The shooting itself had ended on a summer afternoon. The investigation had revealed years of warning signs. Now detectives were approaching the final stage. The stage where motive, planning, and history converged into a single devastating conclusion. The stage where the full story would finally reveal itself. By the time investigators entered the next phase of the case, they were no longer asking who committed the massacre. That question had been answered on the day of the shooting. They were asking something far more difficult. How had a respected university professor reached the point where he could walk into his own workplace carrying multiple firearms and open fire on people he had known for years? The answer would not emerge from a single witness statement. It would not emerge from a single piece of evidence. Instead, it appeared slowly, like an image developing in a darkroom. One detail at a time. One document at a time. One conversation at a time. Eventually, the fragments began aligning. And when they did, investigators found themselves staring at a picture that was both deeply troubling and strangely familiar. Not because they had seen this exact case before, but because they recognized the pattern. A pattern that appears in many targeted acts of violence. Long-term grievance. Escalating resentment. Social isolation. Perceived victimization. Obsessive thinking. A gradual collapse of the boundary separating anger from action. The breakthrough came when investigators stopped treating the shooting as a single event and began examining it as the final chapter of a much longer story. The massacre was not the beginning. It was the conclusion. The violence of August 24th represented the endpoint of a process that had unfolded over years. That realization changed everything. The more detectives reviewed records, the clearer the timeline became. Again and again, they encountered evidence of conflict. Complaints. Accusations. Professional disputes. Letters. Administrative actions. Arguments involving colleagues and university officials. Individually, none of these events explained the massacre. Together, they revealed a man who increasingly viewed himself as surrounded by enemies. This distinction became the heart of the investigation. Because investigators were no longer simply studying what happened. They were studying how Fabricant interpreted the world around him. Reality matters. But perception often matters just as much. A person who believes they are constantly under attack may react very differently from someone who views the same events as ordinary setbacks. Over time, Fabricant appeared to construct a narrative in which nearly every professional disappointment reinforced a single belief. He was being wronged. He was being excluded. He was being denied recognition he deserved. Whether others agreed with those conclusions became almost irrelevant. The important fact was that he believed them. And belief can become extraordinarily powerful. Particularly when it is repeated day after day, month after month, year after year. Investigators discovered that many conflicts within the engineering department followed a similar pattern. Disagreements that might have ended for most people continued growing. Arguments rarely disappeared. Instead, they accumulated. One grievance connected itself to another. One perceived insult attached itself to previous frustrations. The emotional weight continued increasing. What made the case especially disturbing was the sheer duration of the process. This was not a sudden emotional explosion. It was a slow-burning fire. The kind of fire that smolders beneath the surface long before flames become visible. As detectives interviewed additional colleagues, a clearer psychological portrait began to emerge. Many described a man who seemed increasingly consumed by conflict. Professional relationships deteriorated. Trust disappeared. Communication became difficult. Some people actively avoided interactions with him whenever possible. Others attempted to manage the situation through formal channels. But regardless of the specific approach, one reality remained constant. The tensions never truly ended. They merely evolved. One of the most important discoveries involved the gap between external appearances and internal reality. From the outside, university life continued functioning. Classes were taught. Meetings occurred. Research projects moved forward. The institution remained operational. Yet beneath that surface, deep fractures had developed. Those fractures were not always visible to students. They were not always obvious to people outside the department. But they existed. And over time, they widened. The investigation revealed that warning signs had appeared in different forms over many years. Some involved threatening behavior. Others involved confrontational interactions. Still others emerged through complaints and disputes that repeatedly drew administrative attention. None of these incidents individually predicted mass murder. That is one of the challenges associated with threat assessment. Human beings prefer certainty. They want clear signals. Obvious danger. Definitive warnings. Reality rarely provides such clarity. Instead, risk often emerges through patterns. Subtle shifts. Escalating behaviors. Changes that seem manageable until viewed collectively. The breakthrough occurred when investigators viewed those patterns collectively. Only then did the significance become unmistakable. The picture that emerged was not of a man who lost control in a single moment. It was the picture of a man whose grievances had gradually become central to his identity. Every disappointment fed the narrative. Every disagreement strengthened it. Every perceived injustice became additional evidence supporting what he already believed. Psychologists sometimes describe this process as grievance collecting. The individual begins preserving emotional injuries rather than resolving them. Old conflicts remain alive. Past frustrations remain active. Nothing is forgotten. Nothing is released. The emotional burden grows continuously. Investigators increasingly believed that this dynamic played a major role in the Concordia massacre. The attack itself appeared targeted rather than random. That fact carried enormous significance. The victims were not selected by chance. They existed within the network of conflicts that had occupied fabricants' attention for years. This realization further strengthened the theory that the massacre represented the culmination of long-standing grievances rather than spontaneous violence. As evidence continued accumulating, another troubling conclusion emerged. Many people had recognized that serious problems existed. Colleagues had noticed tensions. Administrators had encountered disputes. Concerns had been raised repeatedly. Yet no one fully anticipated the scale of violence that would eventually occur. This is one of the most difficult truths surrounding many acts of targeted violence. Warning signs may be visible. The final outcome often remains unimaginable. People can recognize risk without comprehending its ultimate destination. Looking backward, the path seems obvious. Looking forward, it rarely does. The investigation forced Concordia University and many other institutions to confront this uncomfortable reality. What responsibility does an organization bear when troubling behavior persists over long periods? How should threats be evaluated? When should intervention become more aggressive? What happens when conflict evolves beyond ordinary workplace disagreement? These questions extended far beyond a single case. They touched on broader issues affecting universities, corporations, and public institutions throughout North America. The Concordia massacre became a case study in the dangers of escalating grievance and organizational blind spots. Meanwhile, investigators continued examining fabricants' actions immediately before the shooting. The evidence increasingly supported premeditation. The weapons. The ammunition. The movements within the building. The selection of targets. None of it suggested impulsive behavior. The attack appeared planned. That conclusion became one of the strongest findings of the entire investigation. Premeditation transforms how a crime is understood. A spontaneous act emerges from emotion. A planned act emerges from decision. The distinction matters legally. It also matters psychologically. Because planning requires commitment. It requires intention. It requires the willingness to imagine violence before carrying it out. The deeper investigators looked, the more deliberate the massacre appeared. This realization strengthened the prosecution's future case while simultaneously revealing the depth of fabricants' obsession. By now, the The broad outlines of the story were becoming clear. Years of conflict. Years of perceived injustice. Increasing hostility. Escalating grievance. Deliberate preparation. Targeted violence. The pieces fit together. Not perfectly. Human behavior is never perfectly understandable. But well enough to reveal the path that led to August 24th. For many observers, this breakthrough generated mixed emotions. On one hand, it provided answers. The massacre no longer appeared completely inexplicable. Patterns had been identified. Motives had been explored. The sequence of events made more sense. On the other hand, understanding offered little comfort. Knowledge cannot reverse death. Explanation cannot restore stolen lives. The victims remained gone. Their families remained grieving. The university remained traumatized. The breakthrough solved an investigative puzzle. It did not heal the damage. As the investigation approached completion, attention gradually shifted toward the courtroom. The evidence was substantial. The facts were increasingly clear. The next chapter would not involve detectives searching for answers. It would involve lawyers presenting them. The justice system would now assume responsibility for determining accountability. And because the case had already captured national attention, the legal proceedings promised to become one of the most closely watched courtroom battles in Canada. The public wanted answers. Families wanted justice. Survivors wanted closure. Whether any of those goals could truly be achieved remained uncertain. But one thing was clear. The investigation had revealed the road leading to the massacre. Now the courts would decide what happened at the end of that road. The man at the center of the tragedy would soon face judgment. And the entire country would be watching. When a crime shocks an entire nation, people often imagine that justice arrives quickly. The reality is very different. The gunfire at Concordia University had ended within minutes. The search for accountability would take much longer. In the weeks following the massacre, the focus gradually shifted away from the blood-stained corridors of the Henry F. Hall building and toward another arena where lives could be changed forever. The courtroom. Unlike the chaos of the shooting, court proceedings follow a strict rhythm. Evidence is introduced carefully. Arguments are presented methodically. Witnesses speak under oath. Every detail is examined. Every conclusion must be justified. The process can feel slow. Sometimes painfully slow. But that slowness exists for a reason. Justice is not supposed to move with the speed of anger. It is supposed to move with the weight of certainty. For the families of the victims, however, patience was difficult. They had already endured the worst phone call imaginable. Already attended funerals. Already faced the impossible task of continuing life after devastating loss. Now they found themselves waiting once again. Waiting for legal proceedings. Waiting for answers. Waiting for accountability. Waiting to sit in the same room as the man responsible. The emotional burden was enormous. Every court appearance threatened to reopen wounds that had barely begun to heal. Meanwhile, public attention remained intense. The Concordia massacre had become one of the most shocking acts of workplace and academic violence in Canadian history. People across the country followed developments closely. The details of the case disturbed them. Not only because of the number of victims, but because of where it happened. A university. A place associated with knowledge rather than violence. A place built upon discussion rather than destruction. The contradiction continued to haunt public consciousness. As preparations for trial moved forward, prosecutors faced a task that was both straightforward and significant. The evidence against Fabricant was overwhelming. Unlike many criminal cases, there was little uncertainty regarding who had committed the attack. Witnesses had observed the shooting. Physical evidence connected him directly to the crime. He had been apprehended after the incident. The central challenge was not proving involvement. The challenge involved presenting the complete story to the court. A story extending far beyond a single afternoon. A story involving years of conflict, planning, an escalating grievance. The prosecution intended to demonstrate that the massacre had been deliberate, premeditated, intentional, not an accident, not a momentary loss of control, a conscious decision that resulted in multiple deaths. To support that argument, prosecutors assembled a vast body of evidence. Witness statements, departmental records, historical documentation, testimony from individuals who had observed the deterioration of relationships within the university. Each piece contributed to a larger narrative. A narrative describing years of hostility eventually culminating in violence. The defense faced a much more difficult challenge. When evidence appears overwhelming, legal strategy often shifts toward interpretation rather than denial. The facts themselves become difficult to dispute. Instead, attention turns toward motive, intent, state of mind, and responsibility. Questions surrounding psychology entered the conversation. Questions surrounding mental state. Questions regarding how the actions should be understood within a legal framework. Courtrooms frequently become places where competing narratives collide. The prosecution tells one story. The defense tells another. The judge and jury must determine which explanation best matches reality. The Concordia case was no exception. As proceedings unfolded, witnesses began taking the stand. For many observers, these testimonies became some of the most powerful moments of the trial. Each witness carried a fragment of the larger story. A memory. An interaction. An observation. A piece of history that helped explain how events had reached such a tragic conclusion. Some described long-standing conflicts. Others described behavior that had caused concern. Still others recounted the terrifying moments of the massacre itself. Together, these accounts transformed abstract legal arguments into human experiences. The courtroom heard about fear, anger, professional disputes, threats, escalating tensions, years of accumulated hostility. The portrait emerging from testimony closely resembled the conclusions reached during the investigation. This had not been a sudden eruption. The roots extended much deeper. For the families of the victims, listening to these details carried a painful cost. Every description forced them to revisit the tragedy. Every witness statement reminded them of what had been lost. Yet many attended anyway. Not because they wanted to relive the experience. Because they needed to see justice pursued. Because absence can feel like surrender. Because showing up can become an act of remembrance. Courtrooms often contain competing emotions. Anger. Grief. Hope. Frustration. The Concordia proceedings contained all of them. There were moments when legal arguments dominated. Moments when technical details became the focus. Moments when procedures slowed progress. These aspects are rarely dramatic from a cinematic perspective. Yet they remain essential. Justice depends upon process. Without process, verdicts become vulnerable. Without process, accountability becomes uncertain. The legal system moved carefully because the stakes demanded it. Meanwhile, public fascination with the case continued. Journalists filled courtrooms. Newspaper reports examined testimony. Television coverage analyzed developments. The massacre had become more than a criminal case. It had become a national conversation. People debated warning signs, institutional responsibility, mental health, workplace conflict, violence prevention. The questions raised by Concordia extended far beyond one individual. Many observers found themselves wondering whether similar situations could exist elsewhere. Universities, government agencies, private corporations. Any environment where unresolved hostility might quietly grow beneath the surface. The trial forced Canadians to confront those possibilities. As evidence accumulated, the prosecution's case remained strong. Witness accounts aligned with physical evidence. The timeline remained consistent. The deliberate nature of the attack became increasingly difficult to challenge. Perhaps the most significant aspect of the proceedings was the growing recognition that the victims had been targeted. This was not random violence. The attack emerged from a specific network of grievances and conflicts. That distinction mattered profoundly. Random violence creates one set of questions. Targeted violence creates another. The latter requires examination of relationships, history, intent, purpose. The courtroom spent considerable time exploring these issues. Eventually, attention turned toward judgment. The moment every major criminal trial approaches. The moment where years of investigation, preparation, and testimony converge. The moment when legal conclusions replace speculation. For families, this stage often carries enormous emotional weight. A verdict cannot restore loved ones. It cannot undo suffering. Yet it represents society's formal response to wrongdoing. A declaration that actions have consequences. A declaration that lives mattered. A declaration that justice, however imperfect, remains necessary. When the verdict arrived, it reflected the overwhelming evidence presented throughout the proceedings. Valerie Fabricant was convicted of multiple counts of first-degree murder, along with other serious offenses connected to the attack. The court recognized the deliberate nature of the massacre. The deaths. The injuries. The hostage-taking. The devastating impact on countless lives. The sentence that followed ensured that Fabricant would spend the remainder of his life confronting the consequences of his actions. Life imprisonment. For many observers, the sentence felt inevitable. The scale of the crime left little room for ambiguity. Yet even after sentencing, the emotional impact remained complicated. Justice and healing are not identical. One can occur without the other. The legal process reached a conclusion. The grief experienced by families continued. The trauma experienced by survivors continued. The memories carried by colleagues continued. No verdict could change those realities. In the years that followed, Fabricant would pursue various legal avenues and seek release through parole processes. Again and again, authorities reviewed the circumstances. Again and again, the extraordinary severity of the crimes remained impossible to ignore. Requests for release were repeatedly denied. The original sentence endured. For many family members and survivors, those decisions provided reassurance. Not closure. Closure is a complicated word. Many people who experience profound loss reject the idea entirely. Some wounds never truly close. Some absences never stop hurting. What justice can provide is something different. Recognition. Accountability. A public acknowledgement that wrongdoing occurred and that society condemns it. The Concordia case achieved that. Yet perhaps the most important consequence of the trial extended beyond the defendant himself. The proceedings forced institutions throughout Canada to examine uncomfortable questions. How should threats be evaluated? How should escalating workplace conflicts be addressed? What warning signs deserve immediate attention? How can organizations identify individuals moving from grievance toward violence? These questions became part of the legacy of the case. A legacy written not only in legal documents but also in policy discussions and institutional reforms. The courtroom battle eventually ended. The verdict became final. The sentence became reality. From a legal perspective, the story reached its conclusion. From a human perspective, it had not. Because long after judges leave the bench and lawyers close their files, the consequences of violence continue. Families continue remembering. Survivors continue healing. Communities continue adapting. The law can punish. It cannot erase. And as the Concordia community slowly moved forward, another chapter began taking shape. A chapter not focused on the perpetrator. Not focused on the courtroom. But focused on the people left behind. The students who returned to campus. The faculty who returned to work. The families who carried memories into the future. The nation that struggled to understand what lessons could be learned. The final chapter of this story would not concern guilt. That question had already been answered. It would concern legacy, memory, and the lasting impact of a tragedy that forever changed Concordia University. When people think about crimes, they often focus on the moment violence occurs. The gunshots, the chase, the arrest, the trial, the verdict. These moments dominate headlines because they are dramatic, immediate, and easy to identify. But the true impact of a tragedy is rarely measured in minutes. It is measured in years. Sometimes decades. Sometimes generations. The Concordia University massacre officially ended on August 24, 1992. The consequences never did. Long after investigators packed away evidence. Long after reporters moved on to other stories. Long after court proceedings concluded. The aftermath remained. Invisible to many people. Impossible to escape for those who lived through it. For the families of the victims, the passage of time created a strange contradiction. The world continued moving forward. Yet part of their lives remained permanently connected to a single afternoon in August. Birthdays arrived. Holidays came and went. Children grew older. Careers changed. Cities changed. Entire decades passed. But there was always an empty space where someone should have been. A chair that remained unoccupied. A voice that no longer answered. A future that had been stolen. Grief does not move in a straight line. Many people imagine mourning as a process with a clear ending. Reality is rarely so simple. Loss changes shape over time. The sharp shock eventually softens. The pain becomes less constant. But absence remains. Certain moments can reopen old wounds without warning. A photograph discovered in a drawer. A familiar expression seen in a grandchild's face. A memory triggered by a random conversation. A place once visited together. For the families of Michael Gordon Hogben, Aaron Jan Saber, Matthew McCartney Douglas, and Foivo Ziogas, these moments became part of life. Not because they chose them. Because tragedy had imposed them. The victims were no longer present to continue writing their own stories. Those who loved them became responsible for carrying those stories forward. Memory became an act of preservation. A refusal to allow violence to define a person's entire existence. Because no life should be reduced to the manner in which it ended. Each victim had lived far longer than the few terrible minutes that brought national attention. They had taught students, built careers, formed friendships, created families, pursued ambitions. Those realities mattered. And they continued to matter long after the headlines faded. For survivors, the aftermath took a different form. Physical injuries eventually healed. Psychological injuries often lingered. Trauma possesses a remarkable ability to ignore calendars. A person can survive an event physically while continuing to experience its effects emotionally for years afterward. Many survivors of violence describe the same phenomenon. The world expects recovery. The mind refuses to follow a schedule. Memories appear unexpectedly. Ordinary situations trigger anxiety. Certain sounds instantly transport a person back to the worst moment of their life. The body remembers even when the conscious mind wants to forget. Those who survived the massacre carried experiences that few people could truly understand. They remembered the fear, the uncertainty, the realization that death was suddenly possible. These memories became part of their personal history. Not because they wanted them. Because they could not escape them. The university itself also entered a long process of recovery. Buildings can be repaired quickly. Communities cannot. The Henry F. Hall building continued standing. Its elevators continued operating. Its classrooms continued filling with students. Its offices reopened. On the surface, normal life returned. But institutions possess memories just as people do. Certain locations acquire meaning through history. Hallways become associated with events. Rooms become connected to memories. The physical environment remains unchanged while the emotional landscape transforms completely. Faculty members who returned to work faced difficult questions. How do you resume ordinary responsibilities after witnessing extraordinary violence? How do you teach classes in a building connected to tragedy? How do you rebuild trust after trust has been shattered? There were no simple answers. Recovery occurred gradually. One day at a time. One semester at a time. 1 year at a time. Students continued arriving at Concordia. Many of them had not even been alive when the massacre occurred. Yet they entered an institution shaped by its history. Whether they realized it or not, they benefited from lessons learned through tremendous suffering. One of the most significant consequences of the massacre involved change. Institutional change. Policy change. Cultural change. Universities across Canada began examining how they handled conflict, threats, and workplace disputes. The Concordia tragedy exposed vulnerabilities that many organizations had previously overlooked. The case demonstrated that long-term hostility should never be dismissed simply because it occurs within an academic environment. Intelligence does not eliminate risk. Education does not eliminate risk. Professional status does not eliminate risk. Human beings remain human beings regardless of credentials. That lesson proved important. For years, many people had viewed universities as fundamentally different from other workplaces. More civilized. More rational. More immune to extreme behavior. The massacre challenged those assumptions. It revealed that unresolved conflict can become dangerous in any environment. Even one dedicated to knowledge. Perhaps especially one dedicated to knowledge. Because academic disputes often involve identity, reputation, recognition, status. Elements that can become deeply personal. As a result, Concordia and other institutions implemented reforms. Procedures were re-evaluated. Reporting mechanisms improved. Security measures expanded. Threat assessment became more sophisticated. Communication between departments received greater attention. The goal was not merely preventing another Concordia. The goal was recognizing warning signs before violence became possible. This focus on prevention represented one of the most important legacies of the case. Every major tragedy leaves behind questions. Some questions concern blame. Others concern responsibility. The most valuable questions concern learning. What can be done differently? What signs were missed? What systems failed? How can future lives be protected? The Concordia massacre contributed significantly to those discussions. Not only within universities. Across workplaces throughout Canada. The case became a reminder that violence rarely emerges without context. There are often patterns. Escalation. Behavioral changes. Persistent grievances. Threatening conduct. These signs do not guarantee violence. But they deserve attention. One of the most uncomfortable lessons from Concordia involves hindsight. After tragedy occurs, warning signs seem obvious. Before tragedy occurs, they often appear ambiguous. This creates a challenge faced by every institution. How should concerning behavior be addressed before certainty exists? Wait too long and risk increases. Act too aggressively and ordinary conflict may be misinterpreted. Finding the correct balance remains difficult. Yet difficult does not mean impossible. The Concordia case encouraged organizations to take threats more seriously, document concerns more carefully, and intervene more consistently. The impact of those changes cannot always be measured. Successful prevention rarely makes headlines. Crimes that never occur are difficult to count. Lives saved through intervention remain invisible. Yet invisibility does not diminish importance. Sometimes the greatest success is the tragedy that never happens. As years passed, the massacre gradually became part of Canadian history. New generations encountered it through documentaries, articles, books, and academic studies. Many viewed it as a case study, a historical event, a lesson from the past. For those directly affected, however, it never became entirely historical. History is something that happened to other people. This happened to them. The distinction matters. Because behind every famous case exist individuals whose lives continue long after public attention disappears. Families continued remembering loved ones. Colleagues continued remembering friendships. Former students continued remembering professors who influenced their lives. Memory became a quiet form of resistance. A refusal to allow violence to possess the final word. That may be the most important truth in this entire story. Mass killers often seek control. Control over others. Control over narratives. Control over how events will be remembered. Yet history rarely grants them complete victory. The Concordia massacre is remembered because people died. But it is also remembered because people lived. Because students carried lessons learned from teachers. Because families preserved memories. Because survivors continued moving forward despite trauma. Because communities rebuilt. Violence can end lives. It cannot erase every trace of them. Looking back now, more than 3 decades later, the story of Concordia remains unsettling. Not because it is incomprehensible. Because it is understandable. The warning signs. The grievances. The escalation. The institutional challenges. The human failures. The psychological deterioration. None of these elements belong exclusively to the past. They continue appearing in workplaces and institutions around the world. That reality makes the case relevant even today. The lessons remain unfinished. Every generation must learn them again. Take threats seriously. Do not ignore persistent patterns of intimidation. Do not assume intelligence prevents violence. Do not dismiss warning signs simply because they emerge in respectable environments. Most importantly, remember that every policy, every reform, and every security measure ultimately serves a single purpose: protecting human life. Because behind every statistic exists a person. Behind every victim count exists a family. Behind every headline exists a story. The story of Concordia University is not ultimately about a gunman. It is not about courtroom arguments. It is not about notoriety. It is about consequences. About lives interrupted. About communities forced to heal. About lessons written in grief and carried forward through memory. On August 24, 1992, violence entered a place devoted to education. It left behind loss, trauma, and questions that would echo for years. But it also left behind determination. Determination to learn. Determination to improve. Determination to remember. And perhaps that is where this story truly ends. Not in the hallway where shots were fired. Not in the courtroom where judgment was delivered. But in the memories of those who refused to forget the people whose lives were taken. Because long after fear fades and headlines disappear, remembrance remains. And sometimes remembrance is its own form of justice.